I'm so pleased to have today the opportunity to talk with my dear friend, the preeminent sociologist, Arlie Hochschild, whose books have been enormously influential. The most recent is Strangers in Their Own Land. And I want you to talk about it, Arlie. You started this book before Trump was elected. What Tell us a little bit about the book and also why you've started this. It reveals a lot about who actually supported Trump and why, but what got you to do this?
Well, in 2011, I was sitting in my office in the sociology department here at UC Berkeley, and I had a moment of thinking, look, we're already doing the splits. Congress was at a total standstill, and left was being what it was, and the right was growing, and there wasn't any talk already then. And I thought, all the things that I've call for some belief in good government. Not that government's the only instrument for improvement of life, but it's an important one. And I was feeling it was being disparaged and given up on. So I thought, I don't know anyone on the extreme right from the Tea Party, not here in Berkeley. And I realized that I lived in a bubble, a geographic bubble.
Berkeley, a bubble?
Berkeley,
Please.
a bubble.
Yes.
And an electronic bubble. I open my laptop and it gives me myself back again. A media bubble. And that my neighbors were in the bubble too. And actually we're all in bubbles. And so I needed to find a bubble that was as far apart and far to the right as I thought Berkeley, California, was to the left. And to take my alarm system off, my moral and political alarm system off, and to permit myself a lot of interest and curiosity about people whose premises I knew were profoundly different from my own.
Now, you went to Louisiana.
I did.
Why?
Well, I went to Louisiana because where the right grown the fastest and strongest, that was the South. But where in the South? I looked at the 2012 returns for the proportion of whites who voted for Barack Obama. And for the whole region of the South, it was 30%. But for Louisiana, it was 14% of whites voting for Obama. So I thought, perfect, this is where I want to go. And within Louisiana, I thought, well, there's this petrochemical center around Lake Charles. They very proudly call themselves kind of the buckle in America's energy belt. And I knew one person there, and she happened to be the mother-in-law of a former graduate student of mine here at Berkeley. And she was an artist and a progressive, but her best friend was very enthusiastic for the Tea Party. No Trump on the horizon, but these two women had been fast friends. They had keys to each other's houses. Their kids loved each other, and they were absolute opposites politically. So I thought, this is interesting. What if I would interview the friends on each side and what we call snowball out from there? So that's how I got going. But I had a red state paradox in mind, in the back of my mind. How could it be that really across the nation, it's the poorest states, the states with the worst education, the worst health care, the most disrupted families, the most car accidents, the most death by gun accidents, the worst pollution, the lowest life expectancy, are also those states that receive more money from the federal government in aid than they give to it in tax dollars, and revile the federal government, don't distrust it. That's the red state paradox. And Louisiana turned out to be an exaggerated version of that. It was the second poorest state. At 44% of its budget came from the federal government. Super Tea Party state.
Now, my hypothesis would have been racism, that you get poor whites and they, because of their own poverty, they're looking for scapegoats and they are angry, and the easiest scapegoat is poor blacks, and the blacks are getting a lot of the federal funding. Now, is that what you found, or was there something else?
That's there, and it's not just in the South. We know that there were more Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s in Muncie, Indiana, than there were anywhere in the South. So not just the South is there, but it's not the whole story. It's not the whole story. So.
Well, let's
Let's get those.
Well, I mean, I've read. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful book, by the way, and thank you so much for that. But I want to share what you discovered
Right.
with others who may not have had a chance yet to read the book.
Yeah.
So, what is, if it's not racism, what is it
We're not
that
only racist.
not only racism? I mean, there is
And
racism,
not just there.
but what is it that you saw that might have? Obviously, you didn't know that Donald Trump was going to be attractive to these people. He wasn't even on the scene yet.
No, that's right. That's right. After listening for 5 years, which I was like the guest that never left, I just kept coming back and, deepening friendships. And for the people I really profiled, I did ask them, where were you born? Could we see where you were born? Where was your school? Well, what row did you sit in your school? Where'd you go to church? Could we go to that church? Where are your parents buried? Can we visit that together? In the course of all that, you get talking with the person and you learn what formed them, how their anxieties got shaped in the course of time. And so doing that and just asking a lot of questions, I came up with the idea that there's a deep story under everybody's politics, left or right. Well, what's a deep story? A deep story is what you feel about a salient situation. It's just what you feel about that salient situation. You take facts out of the deep story, and you take moral precepts out. It's just that. It can be told as almost you'd tell a dream. And it's at that level of consciousness. And in the right-wing deep story, your feet are facing up a hill. You're in a line as in a pilgrimage. At the top of the line is the American dream. And the line hasn't moved for a very long time. And your feet are tired. And you feel deserving to move forward toward that dream. And you don't feel that you have malice toward anyone. It's just you have an intention to move ahead in this line and a deserving of that. And then in another moment of the right-wing deep story, you see line cutters and you think, oh my goodness, who's that? Well, it is through federally mandated affirmative action programs for blacks that finally open opportunities that have always been reserved for whites. It's even worse, women like myself who, finally are given opportunities that have been reserved for men. And then non-documented immigrants seem to be cutting in line. Refugees seem to be cutting in line in this most polluted of states. It looks like the oil-soaked brown pelican with its, the Louisiana state bird that endangered, nearly expired. It kind of waddles up and it's cutting in line because people said, oh, the liberals, they put animals over people. So another moment of this right-wing deep story, Barack Obama seems to be waving to the line cutter. Oh, he's their president. He's sponsoring them. He's forgotten me, us. We're being moved back. And isn't he a line cutter? So many people asked me, how did Barack Obama's mother, she was a poor single mother, how could she afford a Harvard education and a Columbia education? My parents couldn't afford that. Something rigged, something fishy. They would go to other explanations for why. Maybe he's a puppet of something. So in another moment of this story, that the line waiter is pushed back and feels like actually none of the things he cares about actually are on the agenda, and that he's kind of lost his culture to Hollywood. He's lost his church, to a growing secularization. People are putting his region down, it's old stupid old South, and that his jobs, his fundamental way of life, and the self that the stoical self he's had to develop to keep that job, all of that seems chancy and eclipsed, and he feels like a stranger in his own land. He can't even go fishing because there's mercury in the fish. It's not his anymore. And finally, there's another moment in the right-wing deep story where someone more educated, someone from the coast, someone with a Harvard or Berkeley PhD, turns around and says, "You ignorant, backward, racist, homophobic, sexist, uncultured redneck." And that's the new epithet. That's okay, I give up. And the last year of my research, I attended a Trump primary in New Orleans, where he comes from the Trump plane down from the sky, thousands of people with very excited with their Trump signs and hats, and crowded in. And I suddenly had a feeling the euphoria was in them. And some people had what the Lord has brought. There was actually a sign like that. I thought, I've been spending 5 years studying the dry kindling, and now I see the match. The book was published before he became our president, but it was plain what was happening.
Well, that deep story, that right-wing deep story, is a very powerful explanation for Donald Trump. But it raises a fundamental question for those of us who feel that Trump is not only a malevolent influence in America, but also is hurting even those people. What is our reaction? What should we, who exist in a completely different bubble, what should we be doing or saying?
Great. There were a lot of people I talked to, I should say, who had a friendly feeling about Bernie Sanders. Oh, he's pie in the sky. He says he's a socialist, but we're a capitalist society. But Uncle Bernie, I didn't hear that about Hillary Clinton, but
well, you wouldn't say,
Bernie.
I mean, anti-Hillary.
Anti-Hillary. No, it didn't. And so you're asking a hugely important question. I think the first thing to do is to establish a set of bridges, and with select people, and listen. For the first, become an active listener. It's not all you have to do, but you can't go forward without it. A man told me, this was actually a good friend, said, I live in Western Massachusetts. There were Trump signs everywhere. I was just so angry and upset. And finally, I left a note in a mailbox of a man. I'd like to talk to you. I saw the Trump sign in your yard. I'd like to talk to you. And the man left a note back, sure. He said, I want to tell you what I really believe. And then the man didn't answer. And then the man that's telling the story said, I wrote another note that said, I'd like to listen to what you have to say. Immediately he got an answer from the Trump supporter, I'd like to listen too. There is under the radar a bridging movement it's grassroots. If you look at the Bridge Alliance, for example, under different kinds of members, you'll see 70 or 80 different organizations with names like Hi from the Other Side or Living Room Conversations, that's begun by the co-founder of MoveOn.org, things like that. And the idea is you can take people who are polar opposites in many ways. This isn't getting just a morph between two moderates. No, you can take people that are really polar opposites, but on one particular issue, you come to common ground. You begin with a mediator skill, talking about the values you have in common, and you break bread together. You are respectful to one another, and then you begin to talk. You know, in my research, I found a man who was really brilliant at talking across boundaries. And I followed him around because I just thought he had something to teach us all on this question. His name was General Russell Honore. He was the hero who rescued the victims of Katrina in 2005 in New Orleans. He's a four-star general, retired and now become an ardent environmentalist. And he did what I would call symbol stretching. And I watched him give a talk to some very conservative Lake Charles business people for whom the big symbol is freedom. Freedom to invest your money, freedom to start a small business, freedom to make money, and a freedom from onerous regulations. And they didn't care about the environment at all. And so General Honore got up and he said, you know, I woke up this morning, looked out at Lake Charles. I saw a man in a boat. He had his line out and his bucket was ready. But that man is not free to lift out an uncontaminated fish. We have so much to learn about symbol stretching. He was saying, look, if you want freedom, you're not thinking about it now, but this is the way you need, we're not free, right? You're in bondage if you're living in pollution.
Sure.
So anyway. Yeah.
It's so interesting, Arlie, because in filming this documentary, Saving Capitalism, I went to visit, among other things, and other people, David Bratt, who is, according to the Conservative Digest, one of the two most conservative members of Congress, Republican. And I went to visit him because when he was victorious over Eric Cantor, the first time that a Speaker of the House has ever been deposed in a primary, he accused Cantor of crony capitalism, of being too close to Wall Street and the big corporations. And I was curious. And we sat down and had a conversation, and we discovered your notion of stretching symbolically, his ideas about crony capitalism and the power of great wealth to get their way in politics, and why that was undermining and destroying the system, could have been
right out of
your
playbook.
playbook.
Yeah.
And we disagreed about so many other things.
Sure.
But here was a bridge.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. And you didn't even actually need to stretch the symbol. What you had done is ferret out a huge common ground that had been buried by disregard.
But your other point about listening is so critically important, and I assume also respecting.
Yes, listening and respecting. And there's a lot to respect. Here are people, generally blue collar in background, and who've gone through a lot. And it's not hard to respect them at all. I mean, they're wonderful people and very smart and very, very thoughtful, capable of ambivalence. We have to dismantle the stereotypes we have, and I do think that the left in its bubble can be prejudice, have a class prejudice. We really got to get rid of that one.
I have
It
a
disturbs me as much as racism.
well. It is a class prejudice, and it is also a cultural prejudice. I've got a friend who came. He won't tell me whether he voted for Trump, but he is an old friend, and he told me something. He said, "Don't ever blame the Trump voters.
Right.
They are not at fault. Donald Trump is a con man. He conned them with Trump University. He conned the people who gave him a lot of money, and he went bankrupt. He cons everyone. His whole life he's been a con man. And he conned a lot of people. He told them lies. Don't blame them for believing him, because a lot of people could fall for a con man."
If they're desperate and if they don't see that the Democratic Party or any other party is offering them anything remotely attractive to their eyes,
Well,
then it's easy to be conned.
Well, you also mentioned Bernie Sanders in passing, and I was interested in that because when I was again going back and preparing or doing filming for Saving Capitalism, I came across these farmers in the middle of Missouri, the farm family who was debating in 2015. They were debating whether to support Trump or Sanders, and I kept on hearing the same thing from rural America, in Kansas and elsewhere. Trump or Sanders, and I kept saying to myself, "Wait a minute, I don't understand this. But, they're not at all equivalent. How can you be debating among these two or between these two?" But what you're saying gives a very powerful clue.
And you have it actually in Saving Capitalism. You're saying actually the two extremes are growing, and they have something in common, which is a loss of faith in
Yes,
mainstream parties.
and the sense that the game is rigged,
Right.
which is close to your deep story. It's
Right.
not the same exactly, but it's very close. Your deep story is that I'm here and standing here and doing my job, and other people are cutting in line.
And that the authority in charge is not looking at me, it's not gazing on me, it's not recognizing my feelings
And my legitimacy.
and my legitimacy, but is only looking at all those recipients of benefits, as they see, who are cutting in line. And they also feel, well, it's my tax dollar that's paying for all the people that are cutting in line ahead of me. So there's that. Some felt that was important. Others, no, it's just, I'm forgotten.
So, one final question, and you're very kind to give me all this time and everybody else all this time. But given everything that you've seen and everything that you've written about and all of your understandings of what happened, and ultimately Trump is, as you say, the fire, the spark on the tinder that you already identified. What do we do in 2018 or 2020? I mean, building bridges, listening carefully, respecting, that's all very important, but it's very hard to build those bridges. It's very hard to break out of our bubbles. And what kind of a leader or leaders do we need?
We need leaders, and they should stand up now, and they should get out there now and try articulating a vision. And it should be a vision that uses this symbol stretch. For example, the thing that I think worries you and I most is really the lifeblood of democracy, a whole system of checks and balances, the importance of a free press, of an independent judiciary. And you can't have a president who just says, I'm going to smash down anyone that doesn't agree with me. That's dangerous. We need that system of checks and balances. It's in the Constitution. It's what we mean by democracy, and it's more fragile than we think. So here's the symbol stretch that I would like the leaders of tomorrow to stand up and say. That, look, people on the right as on the left are patriots. I went by every mailbox, nearly everyone, had a little flag, or people had a flag on their shirt, or they had it in the back of their pickup, flags. They felt patriotic. But when I asked them, what is it? What does it mean to you to be an American and a patriot? They would say, well, I would die for my country. I would go in the military and I would sacrifice my very life. That's how strong and powerful it was. But that definition of patriotism didn't stretch on over to checks and balances and a press, whether you like it or not, and a judiciary, whether you agree with the opinions or not. So I think as we talk, as we build respectful bridges, as we nurture leaders to go ahead and forge these bridges, that we need to do that most essential symbol stretch.
Well, it's not going to be easy, but it may be the only option we have. Arlie, thank you so much. Arlie Hochschild, author of Strangers in Their Own Land, and right now, many of us feel like strangers in our own land.
That's very true.
Thank
Very
you.
true. My pleasure.